Okay. Well, hello everybody to the very first edition of the open mic, actually as an open mic. I, of course, am Rich Ehisen. Most of you have seen my author interviews over the last several years in written form. And so today, for the very first time, we're gonna actually do this live. And I'm thrilled beyond words to introduce you to hopefully a writer you've seen on the website in the past. But one of my very favorites. I'm sure she would be one of yours if you take the time to find her books. And we're going to talk about her newest book, The Rage Room. And of course, I'm talking about my good friend here, Lisa de Nikolits. Lisa, how are you this evening?
I am very well, Rich, and I just want to thank you for all your support over the years. Really, it's meant a real great deal to me. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for featuring me on the open mic and for your support of all the books.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's jump right into it because you do have a new book out. As people can see right behind you with the poster, it's called The Rage Room. And one of the things that I've always admired about your work is how eclectic it is. And I haven't read every book, but I'm sure I've read at least 6 of your books now, and they are all so unique and so um, uh, I don't want to, when you say different, it sounds almost like a negative, and I wouldn't mean it that way, but they're not the mainstream kind of thing that, somebody just cranks out genre fiction, which is why I think I find them so interesting. And in this book, if I've seen it described as a somewhat comic dystopian thriller. If anything can be comic dystopian, if anybody could write comic dystopia, it would have to be you. And I thought about this because we're in, when you say dystopian, that's a scary word to a lot of people these days, because if anyone's been paying attention for the last few years here, I think a lot of us are afraid of a real dystopian future. But the world you created was incredibly different in this book, very technologically advanced, all the things, the George Jetson-esque kind of things, and yet with all of these very real human foibles. So tell me a little bit about the book. Tell me a little bit about what inspired this book, and what was your thinking going, as you were writing this story?
There was so much that went into it. And I think the thing that I'd like to say to hopefully potential readers is it's a fun read, because I think a lot of people right now are tired of anger and tired of dystopia. So they might look at The Rage Room and go, well, I just don't want more anger. That's not what I'm looking for right now. But The Rage Room is an escape into a possible or potential future, but it's actually what I think a fun read, because the characters, I love the characters, and I talk about this as if I did not write the characters, because I'm really removed from them in a sense. I look at them from a distance with so much love and affection. And the audiobook of The Rage Room is busy being recorded, and just listening to it as a completely removed person, it was really quite fascinating, Rich, to observe that world building. And I didn't actually feel like it came from me. I felt like this book was, how can I say, written by somebody else in a sense, which is kind of perhaps a strange thing to say. And I take your point exactly about the eclectic nature of my books. They are so very different. And it does make it difficult for me as an author, because when people want the elevator pitch, I don't have that genre one-liner. And that does not work to my advantage. But if we look at writers like Harry Crews, who I love so very, very much, or let's say Charles Bukowski, I think there's so much humor in those dark situations. And so that's what I aspire to be, a Harry Crews or Charles Bukowski. I mean, obviously, I have a long way to go, but that kind of world building is what I imagine.
Well, one of the other word aside from dystopia that really applies here is because you take a very feminist approach to this, and I definitely don't want to give away the ending to anybody, but you know, I think also that you have tapped into a time when a lot of voices that have been, if not completely marginalized, certainly you know, minimized in many ways, are really making it clear they're not content with that anymore. And you found in the characters in this book, uh, even one I would consider to be very unlikable, and I'm sure you'd probably know I'm talking about Sharp's wife. In the end, again, I asking the question, I don't want to give away or give it away here, but the that angle on this to me was extremely interesting. Talk to me a little bit more about that approach that you took here.
Well, I think Celeste was a really, really interesting character. And I was surprised by her character development. And there was a twist, right? When about 2/3 the way through the book, there was a twist when Celeste revealed something about herself that was very surprising and cast a different light on her experience of the whole relationship with Sharps. Because, so just to contextualize for the readers, what we have is we have Sharps Barkley. And in this futuristic world, Sharps is a flailing man. And I want you to imagine Jason Bateman, because that's how I saw him in my mind. And maybe Jason Bateman will make a movie. That would be so cool.
I can see that. He'd be
It would,
great.
he'd really work, wouldn't he?
Great. He'd be perfect.
So we have Jason Bateman, and he's flailing, and his whole perfect life is about to fall apart. And he's about to be exposed as a fraud. Now, the thing that's most important to him is being a perfect husband, a perfect father, and a perfect son. And he's going to be revealed for being an absolute fraud in every area that matters to him. So what he does is, on Christmas Eve, on a perfect moment, he kills his family because he wants to preserve that moment where they don't know what a mess he is. And then, of course, he regrets it and he wishes he could fix it. And then, because it's dystopian, there's the time travel aspect where he's given the opportunity to go back and fix what he's done. I really wanted to try and use the time travel almost in an allegorical sense. What would you do if you had messed up everything in your life and you were given the chance to go back? Can you fix it? Or is it within your nature that you just are doomed to fail because you are the mess that you are? So Sharps, by giving Sharps these 5 jumps to go back in time, he was given various scenarios to see whether he could change. And I'm not going to say to the reader like whether he did or he didn't, because that's all part of the book. But the book was also supposed to be an exploration for all of us on, if we've made a complete mess of things, if we had the chance to go back and do things differently, what would we do? Of course, Sharps gets into situations that go from bad to worse to even worse to like, oh my goodness, incomprehensibly worse. But some of them are quite funny. I think some of them are kind of quite funny, the journey. So it was also supposed to let the reader know, like, well, what would I do if I was in that situation? So it was supposed to open up a lot of questions. And also, really, I don't see the Rage Room as being sort of fictional, but more predictive. Because all the things in the book, the artificial intelligence, the aggressive, intrusive advertising, I don't think that's unrealistic. How actually we're becoming so detached from nature, and how plastic is slowly devouring our world. It is devouring our world. I mean, in the Rage Room, everything is made of plastic. So yeah, there were many layers, Rich, to this story. It's probably the hardest book that I've ever written, and it may well be the book that I love the most for that reason, because it sucked the marrow out of my bones, really.
Well, yeah, I thought about it a lot as I was reading this, and you know, whether you intended this or not, I think one of the things that often shows is that even in that future world, incompetent men still seem to fail up, and Sharps is nothing if not an incompetent man who has managed to fail up, and even when he kind of recognizes that he has failed and yet he's failed upward, he's not satisfied. Nothing's ever really good enough for him. And ultimately, he does this horrible thing that he has. Then, of course, that's not good enough either. So he's got to try to fix it, constantly trying to fix it. And again, I don't want to give away the ending. Let's just say that, you know, I love that you often craft these worlds where it's okay to be imperfect, but you know, let's just say not such good people, karma seems to work for them. You know, I mean, it seems to work on them in your books, which I always appreciate.
It does. It certainly does. And I think that I've just realized something in our conversation here. In my world, for me personally, watching men fail up has been such an absolute frustration, Rich. And I never realized, and maybe that got written into the book. And and it was a subconscious thing, because I didn't realize it until this point. But yes, throughout the years, in my world personally, sitting on the sidelines and seeing incompetent men being promoted up by their friends when really they should have been fired, you know, so long ago. Yeah, so well done, and thank you, because I think I didn't realize that, you know, that was something that I was addressing. But yeah, that's a definite thing. So I'm quite happy with how that worked out in the book.
Well, and you know, I've mentioned a couple of different times that, you know, that there's this feminist undercurrent here. But another thing that I really like in this book, of course, and all of your books, Rotten Peaches and Occult Persuasion, and so many others, you know, I think one of the most difficult things that writers do is to write fully realized characters. You know, two-dimensional is really not that difficult. Good three-dimensional realistic characters with flaws are a little more challenging, and that's, you know, often what separates, you know, people who are really good at this from people who are, you know, still trying to get good at it. But one of the things I have seen a lot of times in how women are written, and maybe, and not always just by men, but sometimes by women too, where women tend to be all of one way or all another. They don't often get to be both good and bad. They don't often get to have flaws the way real people do. And yet your female characters, and including Celeste, Ava, all of the characters in his mother, they're hard, even the somewhat omnipotent being, I don't want to call her omnipotent, but not mother, well, mother
Minnie.
too, Minnie, who's got this essence of omnipotence, is actually not. She's also everybody's flawed, because and I thought that was really great, because it makes the story that much more believable and acceptable, because I don't know any perfect people, and you know, I don't think anyone else does either. So if you would maybe address that, is that something you're consciously aware of when you're writing these characters?
Yes, most definitely, because everybody, all of us, we fail, we make mistakes, we have feelings. And I think with all the books, and you mentioned Rotten Peaches, which is again one of my favorite books, because those two characters were both of them were so utterly flawed, and yet you were pulling for both of them. And I think that's something it's so important to me, Rich. When I start writing a book, before I even start with the story, I have the idea in my head of what I want the story to be about. And I have a vague idea of what the ending is going to be, and I certainly know the beginning. I'm not really sure of the middle, but what I do before I start writing is I craft all of the characters, I overcraft them, I write notes about them, I develop them, their weaknesses, the things they do well, and the things that they fail at. So I have those characters really, really strongly mapped out. So then what happens is I start the beginning of the book, which I know what is the beginning is going to be. But then what I don't know is how the characters are going to react in a given situation. Because they could do something good, they could do something ambivalent, they could do something bad. And it's really interesting to see what is the right thing for that character to do at that time. And sometimes as a writer, it feels wrong to me. I'll be like, no, but that's not what I wanted to happen. But then because the character's done that, I almost observe and think, well, okay, now I'm going to have to make that work into the story. And yes, to your point, in the back of my mind, the myriad elements of what that character behaviors that character could call upon are all there. It's almost like this Rolodex flips in my brain. What's he going to do? And then it rolls, and then it stops at a certain thing. He's going to do this. But I have that reservoir, that Rolodex of all the possible things that he could do in the back of my mind. So it's fascinating to see how it unfolds. That's why I never know what's going to happen in the middle of the book.
See, that's interesting. I love that because, there's always two trains of thought. I mean, I know writers who will not start anything until they might have a 50-page outline and know every single thing that's going to happen, beginning, middle, end, everything in between, and they will not deviate from that. And others, and I think Stephen King is the most prominent example of somebody I can think of who sits down with an idea and just starts writing and has no idea what's going to happen. So there's multiple ways that you can go with that. And so I'm all, as a question I ask every writer I come in contact with, are you an outliner or do you seat of the pants it? And you said almost like a little combination of both. Like you have an idea of where you're starting, and then after that, it's like free form, baby. This is what we're doing.
Well, actually, Rich, I always have outlines. I always have it mapped out. I have the beginning. I do have it mapped out, but I know that middle is not going to work out like I think it's going to. So I have it written out, but I don't regard it with any kind of seriousness because it never pans out that way. But somehow I find my way to the end. And the thing is, I think as well with the whole writing thing is once I start, because I'm actually gearing up to write the sequel to The Rage Room. And so, yes, it's very exciting. I've actually been working on it, oh goodness, a really long time. And so I have like a binder that's like that thick. I've got storyboards, I've got plot outlines, I've got characters lined up. Basically, everything's ready to go. But when I start, it's literally like falling into a black hole and it just consumes me. And I'm a little afraid of that. I'm also a little tired right now physically because I do have a day job and life as we know it is quite tiring. So it's also knowing that, well, when am I going to make that commitment where, I always have to have my day job and I love my day job, but where everything else will get pushed aside, cleaning the house, playing the guitar, doing yoga, all those things will have to, worrying about eating nutritious meals. Everything will have to fall by the wayside and I just have to dive into the deep end. And I'm a little afraid of that because it's so intense and it's so tiring, to be honest. It's, it's like being ravaged in a way.
It's interesting, I'm so jealous of writers that just get to write. And
Yeah.
I'm so admiring of writers who do have full-time day jobs and still crank out a book a year, or every other year even, because for those folks who have never taken on a task like this, imagine writing a PhD dissertation level of research and work, even on a piece of fiction. It's an astounding amount of work. And then you have to go out there and try to get someone else to see it the way you do and be willing to actually invest some money in it and put it out there into the world. And that is like, seriously, like hitting a moving target from 500 yards with a pea shooter. So I hope everybody who picks up a book in a bookstore and reads it has a true appreciation for what it took, beginning to end, for that creative piece of work, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or something in between, to get to their hands, because it's truly a monumental task. I clearly I admire writers a lot, and because they're all better than me. I mean, I write words for a living, but not like you. I mean, before I go off too far on that wormhole. Another thing that I've really always noticed about your work, I think it's one of the reasons I like it so much. As I say, every piece is individual and unique. Everyone. Now, the Rage Room sounds like that's the first one that comes to mind that will be a follow-on to anything else. Everything else is very unique. And I've read pieces of yours that are set in the United States, that are set in Canada, that are set in South Africa, in Australia, which, of course, if anyone's paying attention, they can probably figure out you're of all those places. We can probably figure out you're South African, but you've lived all over the world. You've lived in Australia, you've lived in the UK, now you're in Toronto. How much does that breadth of cultural immersion play into these characters and into these settings? And do you ever think, well, that's a great story, but it'd be better if I said it here as opposed to said it there?
Most definitely. And I mean, I've been really lucky because I also lived briefly in London, UK, and worked from there. I've traveled a lot to China. I mean, I really love going to China. China has this crazy energy to it, and obviously pre-COVID, but going to Beijing, going to Shanghai, going to the Great Wall of China. And I make it a point to going to the Great Wall of China was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life, taking the chairlift up to the wall. And all these things are so pivotal to the writing. When I was working for Redwood Custom Communications, I did a lot of work in the US. We worked in Atlanta, Grand Rapids. I've been to so many places, and all of those things do play into my work. I did a shoot in Raleigh, and even those characters, it was a multi-generational shoot, and it was just such a fun thing to do. So those three characters are always with me in my head, and so is that little photo shoot, and it was a makeover that we did. So that's just a small example of like how my head is very full, Rich. My head is very full. All the people that I meet just and chat to, and it all plays in it. It's like I've got this fabulous sort of repertoire of wardrobes and people in my head. But it is a very full place up in the head. But definitely the travel is crucial. The scenery, because then it'll be like, well, those rocks were an amazing thing. But sometimes if it's obviously fantastical or surreal, it's like, the rocks that I saw in Churchill, Manitoba, I'm going to put somewhere else. So, you can sort of move things around in surreal writing. So I enjoy that. But the fact that I've seen them definitely is hugely helpful.
Well, and I was thinking of your previous book, The Occult Persuasion, because, there is a different, now I haven't been to China, but Australia definitely has a different energy than London, which has a different energy than New York, which has a different energy than Atlanta or LA or Toronto. And I find one of the things that I really enjoy when writers can bring the setting in almost as a character is it gives you as a reader a greater sense of being there with those people. And I think you do that very, very well. I think you do that very well. And I was thinking of Rotten Peaches because the scenes that take place in South Africa are, you know, she's in a somewhat dangerous spot and in a dangerous situation. And it was, I mean, I was doing this going, is she going to be okay kind of thing? Because it really felt very real to me at that moment. So, I mean, I do admire that. That's a tremendous skill to be able to bring setting in as a character. Do you think of it that way as a character, or is it still relatively background for you and it just, you know, it's something you work on, but do you think of it as a character, or is it something else?
I don't think of it as a character, but it's absolutely essential. Like, for example, when Bernice was at the farm, and for me, it was so important that the readers had such a tactile experience of being there. And so it was it's always really important to me that it's cinematic. I think I don't see setting as character, but as necessary cinema that I wish to immerse the readers in. I want the reader, when they're reading the book, to actually be surrounded and really be in that world and not have to wonder about anything, to feel temperature, what they're smelling, the room that they're in, the objects that they're surrounded by. And without even listing all those things or describing them, I want the reader to feel that. And yes, and definitely with the scenario that we mentioned in the farm, you know, that was something that actually my parents had a small farm and there was an attack on the farm. It did not escalate to that degree, but the dogs actually had to be protective. The dogs were so traumatized by the experience, and this is really very sad, and I apologize to anybody watching this, but the dogs were so traumatized they had to be put down after the experience because it was that, you know, violent an attack. And I was not there. My dad just told me what had happened, and then, you know, told me what happened with the dogs. And of course they didn't they tried to tranquilize them and, you know, but they were so stressed by what had happened. So it was a terrible thing that happened. And I wanted to bring that into the book because people don't know about these things, right? And so if I write it into the book, it will reach more people. And even Betty, like the housekeeper in Rotten Peaches, I really wanted people to know about Betty. It was really important to me. So, and even like back to the rage room, I feel like there's so many people like Sharps who are so frustrated in their daily lives and so despairing because he is despairing. He's like, how do I deal with this situation? And I feel so many of us feel that right now. We're in a situation, so many things are beyond our control. So how do we cope? And to a large degree, the rage room is about a myriad bunch of people all sort of asking themselves, how do I manage this somewhat untenable situation? So,
well, let me, you know, actually, and I'm glad you brought that up because it is one thing, you know, the pandemic has caused havoc for most authors. I don't know a single author who didn't have a book release pushed back, all their, you know, signings canceled, etc. Of course. The interesting thing is, again, because your book comes out at this time when we're all feeling this claustrophobia to some extent, and yes, we are surrounded by so many angry people, and seemingly over dumb stuff. I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of us think, you know, of all the things to be angry about, you know, that just it's confusing for a lot of us, and so I thought about that when I was reading about Sharps. And again, it's like, how bad is your life, dude? You've got everything, and yet nothing seems to make you happy. And for whatever the flaws of the other characters around him, they seem to at least be happy with their lot in life. And yet he was constantly upset. And that's why he went to these rage rooms where clearly many other people were doing the same thing. Were you ever concerned, because of that theme to some extent, that the timing of it all might not be good for readers to read that kind of a book, even with the comic undertones, that that this might be a time where someone says, I don't want to read about anything dystopian, right? I mean, would that ever concern you?
It actually made me want to put the book out more than ever, because I was supposed to have another book scheduled, Mad Dog and the Sea Dragon. But I really felt very strongly that the Rage Room is an expression of now. And the reason why I felt that people might be interested in reading it was because it gives voice to the situation we are in. And actually, I wrote it pre-pandemic, so I didn't even know about that. Sure. But I went one day. I just heard these expletives being uttered, violent sort of diatribe, and I turned around the corner to see who was expressing these, and it was a little child. He must have been about 6, and he was cursing. The air was turning blue. And I just stood there for a moment on the street, and I watched people, and I thought, everybody's so angry. And then I went online, and people are angry on Facebook, and someone posts something and everybody hates what they post and post comments about it. And everywhere I looked, I saw this anger. So I thought to myself, it's really important, almost as a sociological statement, to say, hey, people, this is where we're at. So let's take a moment to observe where we're at. And as you say about shops, let's think our situation is not so bad. Let's diffuse the anger. So more than ever, Rich, I felt that this book had to come out now, because it's a sociological commentary on, what the time is. But I really, really don't want readers to think that it's a heavy read. I don't want them to think like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go into this and I'm going to be lectured about what this dystopian world is like, or I'm going to be admonished because I'm angry. I mean, I think it's a fun journey with all the plot twists and turns and things that happen, and the things that the characters do. They fall in love and things go wrong, and things like that. So while there are all those really, I feel, important messages that I hope actually will reassure the reader that they're not alone, I really hope that they'll have a good time reading the book, more than anything, really.
Well, yeah, we're right here at the end, so I don't want to keep it too long, but I will say, for anyone who is thinking about it, you can see right behind Lisa's right shoulder, the Rage Room, Lisa de Nikolits. I urge you strongly, go find a copy of this book. And she's right, I have read it. And yeah, sure, it's a dystopian future. So what? There's lots of, I think of Brazil, I think of Fifth Element, there's room to enjoy these things as entertainment. And if anyone, as I've said before, if anyone could turn something like that into something just entertaining, you have done it. And you're a master at it, actually. What would you call it? The surreal comic thriller to some extent. So again, for everybody who has seen this, please go check it out. I highly recommend it. Check out all of Lisa's books. She's again, if you've read one, you have not actually read them all. They're all of them tend to be a fun thrill ride with a lot of ups and downs and interesting people. And I find them all really worth my time. So I think you will too. So please do that. Lisa, thank you very much. I really appreciate you making some time for me again. You've done this 2 or 3 times now to share your insights on books and writing. And when the sequel comes out, maybe we'll do this again and we can chat about that sequel. And maybe we'll all be living in a less dystopian world ourselves at that time, right?
I am fully convinced that we will. Things are going to come right and things are going to be good. So thank you very much for having me as a guest, Rich. It's been wonderful chatting to you. It really has. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Stay with me just a moment when I click off here, and otherwise we'll talk to you all later. Thanks again.